On this day, I disown Shakira. She has brought nothing but disgrace to this family. She is no longer my child or responsibility.
Please, don't do this!
Her father's hand came down on the microphone stand so hard it rattled the speakers, and 200 relatives went silent in the middle of the Anderson family reunion. Shakira Anderson stood in the center of the banquet hall in the pale yellow dress she had bought, specifically because her father loved that color on her, and she watched him point a finger at her chest and tell every cousin, aunt, uncle, and family friend in the room that she was no longer his daughter. He said the word disowned the way other men said good morning, easy, practiced, like he had been waiting years for the right audience. He said she had embarrassed the family for the last time. He said her name would not be spoken in his house again. And across the room, seated at a table, no one had invited him to, but no one had dared question either. A Korean man in a charcoal suit set down his glass of water and watched every second of it without blinking. If you were standing in that room right now, hearing your own father humiliates you in front of everyone who ever knew your name, what would you do? Stay for the rest of this story because what happens next is going to change how you see every family gathering you have ever sat through. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe, tap that like button, and drop the city and state you are watching from in the comments below. Let us get into it. 3 hours earlier, Shakira had been the first person to arrive at the Peachtree Grove Event Center on the outskirts of Atlanta, because she always arrived first. She had organized every Anderson family reunion for the last 6 years, not because anyone asked her to, but because if she didn't, nothing got done. She had negotiated the venue discount herself, called in a favor from a caterer she used to work with, and spent her own money on the centerpieces because her father complained the family budget was tight the same year he bought a new truck. She had learned a long time ago that in the Anderson family, love was a thing you earned through labor, and even then, it was never guaranteed to stay earned. She was 33 years old, and she ran a boutique investment consulting firm out of a small office in Midtown that she had built from nothing after she left her father's construction company 4 years earlier. Leaving had cost her almost everything. Her father, Reginald Anderson, had built Anderson Structural Group into one of the largest Black-owned construction firms in the Southeast, and he had expected his only daughter to spend her life managing his books, smiling at his clients, and eventually handing the company to her older brother Terrence, who Reginald called his legacy the way other men talked about their sons in the military. Shakira had done the books for 9 years. She had also, quietly, taught herself finance at night, gotten her certifications on her own dime, and built relationships with clients her father never knew she was cultivating. When she left to start her own firm, Reginald had called it Betrayal. He told anyone who would listen that his daughter thought she was better than her family. He hadn't spoken more than a handful of words to her in the 4 years since, communicating instead through Terrence, through their mother, through silence at holidays that felt more like punishment than tradition. And still, every year, Shakira showed up to organize the reunion because her grandmother had started this tradition, and her grandmother was the one person in that family whose love had never once come with a bill attached. She was setting the final centerpiece on table 11 when she felt someone watching her. She looked up and found a man standing near the entrance, tall, unfamiliar, dressed in a suit that cost more than the entire reunion budget, scanning the room with the quiet, unhurried attention of someone who was used to being the most important person wherever he walked in. He was Korean, maybe in his late 30s, with the kind of stillness that made people around him instinctively lower their voices. She didn't recognize him. She assumed, reasonably, that he had wandered into the wrong event. "Can I help you?" she asked, walking toward him with the practiced politeness of a woman who had spent years managing her father's business relationships. He studied her for a moment before he answered. "I believe I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," he said. "My name is Hyun-woo Cho. I was invited." Shakira frowned. "Invited by who? This is a private family reunion." "Your father," Hyun-woo said, and something flickered behind his composed expression that she couldn't quite read. "Reginald Anderson invited me personally 3 weeks ago. He said, and I'm using his words, that he wanted me to see something." She had no idea what that meant, and she didn't have time to ask, because at that exact moment, Terrence came through the doors with their mother on his arm, and the first wave of relatives began arriving behind them, and the machinery of the day pulled her away from the strange, still man in the expensive suit before she could get a real answer. She would understand what her father meant 3 hours later, standing in front of 200 people, hearing him call her a disgrace, and realizing that Hyunwoo Cho hadn't been invited to witness a celebration. He'd been invited to witness a public execution, and her father, for reasons she couldn't yet understand, had wanted his greatest business rival to have a front-row seat to it. The reunion had gone wrong slowly, the way most disasters do, one small thing compounding into another until the room could no longer pretend everything was fine. It started with Terrence's toast, in which he thanked their father for building an empire that would, he said, one day belong entirely to him, and Shakira had smiled through it the way she always did, the way she had trained herself to smile through every moment that quietly erased her from her own family's story. It continued when Reginald stood to speak after dinner, and instead of the usual remarks about gratitude and legacy, he began, without warning, to talk about disappointment. He didn't use her name at first. He talked in circles, about children who forgot where they came from, about ingratitude, about people who took everything a family built and walked away without a backward glance. The room grew quiet in the specific way rooms grow quiet when everyone realizes a private wound is about to be opened in public. Shakira felt her stomach drop before he ever said her name because she recognized the rhythm of this speech. She had heard versions of it for 4 years, in smaller rooms, with smaller audiences. She had never imagined he would deliver the full version here, in front of everyone, with a stranger from his rival company watching from table 6. "Shakira," he finally said, turning to face her directly, and every head in the room turned with him. "Stand up." She stood, because some habits from childhood don't leave the body, even after the mind has grown past them. "You left this family," he said. "You took everything I taught you, and you used it to build your own little firm, because you thought you were smarter than your father, smarter than your brother, smarter than the business that put clothes on your back. And now you stand in this room, in a dress I'm sure you bought with money you made stealing my clients, and you smile like nothing happened." He shook his head, and his voice rose, and something in his eyes had the specific, terrible clarity of a man who had been rehearsing this for a very long time. "I want everyone here to understand something. As of tonight, you're no longer my daughter. You won't use my name. You won't attend Anderson family events. You're disowned, effective immediately." The room did not gasp. It did something worse. It went completely, suffocatingly silent. 200 people holding their breath at once, waiting to see what a disowned woman does with her body in the seconds after her father erases her. Shakira did not cry. She would think about that later, replay it in her mind, and be strangely proud of the fact that she didn't cry. She stood very still, her hands at her sides, her chin level, and she looked at her father the way she had learned to look at difficult clients, calm, unreadable, giving him nothing to feed on. And then, from table 6, a chair scraped back against the hardwood floor, loud enough that every head in the room turned again, this time toward the stranger in the charcoal suit, who was rising slowly to his feet, with the unhurried authority of a man who had never once in his life needed to raise his voice to be heard. "Reginald," Hyunwoo Cho said, and his tone was pleasant, almost conversational, which made it land harder than shouting ever could have. "You invited me here tonight because you wanted me to witness your daughter's failure. You told me, 3 weeks ago, over dinner, that she was the reason you'd lost the Meridian Logistics contract, that she'd taken your best client relationships when she left and used them to undercut you." He paused, letting the words settle over the room. "I looked into that claim, because I do my due diligence on every business owner I sit across a table from, and what I found, Reginald, is that your daughter didn't take a single client from you. She built her entire client base from companies you were never sophisticated enough to win in the first place." Reginald's face went through several colors in rapid succession. "This is a family matter," he said. "This has nothing to do with you." "It became my matter," Hyunwoo said, "the moment you tried to use my presence here as a stage for humiliating a woman whose financial models I've been quietly studying for the last 8 months. He turned, and for the first time, looked directly at Shakira, and something in his expression was not pity, and it was not performance. It was recognition, the specific look of a man seeing someone clearly for exactly who they were. My company has been trying to identify who was behind the restructuring proposal that saved the Callahan Group $11 million last year, he said. It took my team 4 months to trace it back to a boutique firm in Midtown with almost no public presence. He held her gaze. It took me considerably less time to realize that firm belonged to you. The silence in the room had changed texture completely. No longer the silence of shock at a father's cruelty, but the silence of 200 people slowly beginning to understand that they'd misjudged something. That the story they thought they were watching wasn't the story that was actually unfolding in front of them. Shakira felt her pulse in her throat. Mr. Cho, she said carefully, I don't understand what's happening right now. What's happening? Hyunwoo said, still holding her gaze. Is that your father just stood in front of everyone he knows and told the world you were a failure? On the same night I flew in from Seoul, specifically to offer you a partnership that would make your firm one of the fastest-growing financial consultancies on the Eastern Seaboard. He glanced once, briefly, at Reginald, whose face had drained of nearly all its color. I didn't come here to watch a man humiliate his daughter. I came here to meet the woman whose work has quietly outperformed every firm your father has ever run. And now that I've seen exactly what she's survived to get here, he said, turning back to her, I find myself considerably more interested in working with you than I was an hour ago. Reginald found his voice, low and dangerous. You will not do business with her. Not through me, not around me. Hyunwoo didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Reginald, he said, with the calm, final precision of a man laying down a card he had been holding for weeks. I didn't come here tonight to ask your permission. I came to give your daughter the offer she's earned. And before this evening ends, I intend to make sure every person in this room understands exactly whose name deserves to be remembered. Shakira stood frozen between the two men, her father's fury radiating from one side of the room and a stranger's quiet, devastating certainty radiating from the other. And somewhere underneath the shock, a single thought rose to the surface with terrible clarity. Whatever her father thought he'd just done to her in front of 200 witnesses, it was about to cost him something he had never imagined losing. Reginald's jaw worked like he was chewing on something he couldn't swallow, and for a moment Shakira thought her father might actually cross the room and put his hands on Hyunwoo Cho in front of 200 witnesses. He didn't. He was too smart for that, too aware of the cameras on half the tables, too aware that a man like Hyunwoo didn't come to a family reunion in Atlanta without people watching, who reported back to people who mattered. Instead he laughed, a short, ugly sound with no humor in it, and turned it back on the room like he was inviting them to laugh with him. Is this what you flew here for? He said to Hyunwoo. To play savior for a woman who couldn't keep her own numbers straight when she worked for me. She lost me the Prescott account. She lost me 2 contractors I'd had for 15 years. You want to hand your company's money to someone who nearly sank mine? That's your business. But you'll do it somewhere else. Not in my daughter's name, because she doesn't have one anymore. Reginald? Shakira's mother said quietly, from the second table. The first thing she'd said all night, her hand tight around her wine glass. That's enough now. It's not enough, Reginald said, not even looking at her. Not until she understands what she threw away. Shakira felt something shift in her chest. Not the familiar collapse she'd braced for, but something harder. Something that had been building for 4 years and had finally run out of room to keep folding itself smaller. She looked at her father, really looked at him, the way she used to look at his balance sheets when the numbers didn't add up and everyone else in the room was too scared to say so. I didn't lose you the Prescott account, she said, and her voice didn't shake, which surprised her more than anyone. I told you 6 months before I left that Prescott's payment terms were going to bankrupt us if we didn't renegotiate, and you told me to stop acting like I understood the business better than you. I have the email, Daddy. I have all of them. I kept everything, because some part of me always knew I'd need to. The room made a sound it hadn't made yet all night, a low ripple of murmurs, cousins leaning toward each other, an aunt's hand rising to her mouth. Terrence, who had been standing near the head table with the stunned, frozen look of a man watching his inheritance rewritten in real time, finally spoke. Shakira, don't do this here. He did this here, she said, not looking away from her father. I didn't choose this room. I didn't choose this microphone. I came tonight to set up centerpieces and make sure Grandma's tradition didn't die. The same thing I've done every year since she passed. I didn't come here to be disowned in front of 200 people who are going to go home tonight and text each other about it before they even get to their cars. A few uncomfortable laughs broke out at the back of the room, quickly swallowed, and Reginald's face went a deep, furious red. "You think this is funny?" he said. "No," Shakira said. "I think it's sad that you needed an audience to do it. I think it's sad that you invited your biggest business rival here, specifically so he could watch you tear me down, because some part of you wanted a witness who'd believe your version of the story before I ever got a chance to tell mine." She paused, and for the first time that night, her voice caught, just slightly, just enough that only the people closest to her could hear it crack. "I spent 9 years making sure your book's balanced. I spent 9 years smiling at clients who called me sweetheart instead of my name, because you never corrected them. I left because I was tired of being useful to you and invisible to you at the same time. And you've spent 4 years telling this family a story where I'm the villain, and I let you, because I kept hoping you'd come around. I'm done hoping." Hyunwoo Cho had not moved from where he stood, watching this unfold with the stillness of a man who understood, correctly, that this moment did not belong to him, that his job right now was simply to remain a witness the way he'd been asked to be, just not for the reasons Reginald intended. But when Shakira finished speaking and the room hung in that terrible, electric silence, he stepped forward once more, and this time his voice carried a different weight, quieter, but somehow louder for it. "Reginald," he said, "I'll say this once, and then I'll leave you and your family to finish whatever this is. In my country, there is an old saying, a man who has to destroy someone smaller than himself to feel powerful was never powerful to begin with." He let that sit for a moment. "I've built and lost 2 companies in my life. I've sat across from men far more dangerous than you. And in 30 seconds tonight, your daughter showed me more integrity, more composure, and more business acumen than you've shown me in 3 years of watching your company slowly lose ground to firms half its size." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a plain white card, and crossed the room, past Reginald, past Terrence, and placed it directly into Shakira's hand. "My offer stands. Call me when you're ready. Not tonight. Tonight, go be with the people in this room who actually love you." He gave Reginald one last look. Not unkind exactly, but final. The look of a man closing a book he no longer had any interest in finishing, and then he turned and walked toward the exit, his footsteps the only sound in a room that had forgotten how to make any other kind. Shakira stood there with the card burning against her palm, and she understood, with a clarity that felt almost violent in its suddenness, that her life had just split into a before and an after, and there was no version of tomorrow that looked anything like the one she'd woken up expecting. Her father's voice found her one more time, quieter now, stripped of its performance because the audience that mattered to him was walking out the door. "You do this," he said. "You take his money. You're finished in this family for good. I mean it this time." Shakira closed her fingers around the card. "You already said that part, Daddy," she said. "I heard you the first time." She turned and walked out of the banquet hall, without looking back at the tables, without looking at her mother's stricken face or Terrence's unreadable one. And she didn't stop walking until she was standing in the parking lot under a sky gone the deep bruised purple of a Georgia evening, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her ears, the white card still gripped in her hand, like the only solid thing left in a world that had just come loose from its hinges. That was when she noticed the black car idling near the entrance, engine running, and Hyunwoo Cho standing beside it, not leaving after all, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name. "I thought you left," she said. "I said I'd let you finish with your family," he said. "I didn't say I'd leave you standing alone in a parking lot at 10 o'clock at night, after what just happened in there." He studied her for a moment. "You don't have to talk to me. I can have my driver take you home and you'll never have to see me again if that's what you want. But I don't think that's actually what you want, Miss Anderson, and I think you and I both know there's something else going on here that has nothing to do with contracts or client lists." Shakira felt her throat tighten. "What do you mean?" Hyunwoo's expression shifted, something more careful entering it now, something that looked almost like reluctance. "Your father didn't invite me here tonight because he wanted a witness to your failure," he said slowly. He invited me because 3 weeks ago, I told him I was considering acquiring a controlling stake in Anderson Structural Group. And 2 days after that conversation, Reginald came to me with a proposal I have not been able to stop thinking about since. He paused, and something in his face told her the next sentence was going to change everything she thought she understood about tonight. He offered to sell me the company at a steep discount, on one condition, that I never do business with you. Shakira stood very still in the parking lot, the white card still pressed into her palm, and for a moment, she couldn't make her mouth form a response, because what Hyunwoo had just said didn't fit into any version of her father she'd built in her head over the last 4 years. Reginald Anderson was proud, and he was stubborn, and he could be cruel in the specific, practiced way of a man who'd learned cruelty worked better than apologies. But he loved his company more than he loved almost anything. She'd watched him refuse to sell a single truck during the worst year of the recession, rather than shrink the business he'd built from a single crew and a rented flatbed. The idea that he would offer to sell it, at a discount, just to keep her away from a partnership, didn't sound like pride. It sounded like fear. "That doesn't make sense," she finally said. "My father would rather lose a limb than sell that company under value. You're telling me he offered you a discount just to keep you from working with me?" "I'm telling you exactly what he said, word for word, because I wrote it down the moment I left his office, because it struck me as strange enough that I wanted a record of it." Hyunwoo's voice had lost its earlier composure, replaced now with something more careful, almost apologetic, like a man who understood he was about to hand someone a weight they hadn't asked to carry. His words were, and I quote, "If you're going to take anything from me, Mr. Cho, take the company. Don't take her. She doesn't know what she's carrying." The phrase landed on Shakira like a stone dropped into still water, sending out ripples she didn't understand yet, but could already feel moving through her. "What does that mean?" she said. "What am I carrying?" "I don't know," Hyunwoo said. "I asked him directly, and he wouldn't elaborate. He told me it was a family matter and closed the conversation. I assumed at the time it was simply the pride of a man who didn't want his rival succeeding where he'd failed. I didn't think much more about it until tonight, watching him stand in front of 200 people and disown you instead of simply telling you the truth, whatever that truth is. That's not the behavior of a man protecting his pride, Miss Anderson. That's the behavior of a man trying to bury something before someone digs it up." Shakira felt the parking lot tilt slightly under her, the adrenaline of the last hour finally catching up with something colder underneath it. She thought of her grandmother, the only person in the family whose love had never come with conditions, who had died 3 years ago with a folder of old paperwork she'd asked Shakira, specifically Shakira, to keep safe. Papers Shakira had never opened, because her grandmother had asked her not to until the time was right. And she had trusted that request the way she trusted very little else in her family. "I need to go home," she said, more to herself than to him. "Let my driver take you," Hyunwoo said. "Please. Not because I'm trying to buy your time or your gratitude. Because it's late, and you've had the kind of night no one should drive alone after." She almost refused out of pure instinct, the same instinct that had kept her independent and self-reliant since she was 25 years old and realized no one in her family was going to hand her anything she didn't build herself. But something in his offer felt different from every other offer she'd ever been handed by a powerful man. Quieter, with no visible string attached, and she was tired, more tired than she could remember being in years, and so she said yes. The ride to her apartment in Buckhead was quiet, both of them looking out opposite windows at the city sliding by. Streetlights catching the wet pavement from an earlier rain neither of them had noticed fall. It wasn't until they were 2 blocks from her building that Hyunwoo spoke again. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "And you don't have to answer if it's too much for tonight." "Go ahead." "Your grandmother," he said, and Shakira turned to look at him fully for the first time since getting in the car. "Your father mentioned her once, in passing, the same conversation where he told me not to take you. He said something about her leaving you, and I remember the word specifically, evidence. He said she left you evidence, and then he stopped himself, like he'd said too much, and changed the subject entirely." Shakira's chest went tight. "Evidence of what?" "I don't know," Hyunwoo said again, and this time his voice carried something that sounded almost like guilt. the discomfort of a man who realized he'd been sitting on information that wasn't his to carry alone. I should have told you the moment I understood what your father was doing tonight, instead of standing in that room deciding whether it was my place to intervene. I'm sorry it took what it took. The car pulled up outside her building, and for a long moment neither of them moved. Thank you for what you did in there, Shakira finally said. I don't fully understand it yet, and I don't know what to do with the offer, or the card, or any of it. But thank you. You don't need to decide anything tonight, he said. But Miss Anderson, whatever your grandmother left you, I'd find it soon. Because a man doesn't stand in front of 200 people and burn a bridge that expensive, unless he's terrified of what's on the other side of it. She got out of the car and stood on the sidewalk watching his taillights disappear around the corner, and then she went upstairs, and she didn't sleep, and at 2 a.m. she finally opened the storage closet in her spare bedroom and pulled down the box she had kept sealed for 3 years, the one with her grandmother's handwriting on the lid, in faded blue marker, the one that said, simply, for Shakira, when you're ready. She sat on the floor of her apartment in the pale yellow dress she still hadn't changed out of, and she opened the box, and the first thing she found on top of a stack of yellowed papers was a photograph she had never seen before in her life. Her grandmother standing beside a young woman who was unmistakably, impossibly, herself, except the clothes were decades old, and the young woman in the photograph was not smiling, and on the back, in her grandmother's careful handwriting, were 4 words that made Shakira's hands go cold. Her name was Adana, not adopted, not a coincidence. My daughter, before your father. Shakira read the words on the back of the photograph 3 times before they fully settled into her understanding, and even then, understanding didn't feel like the right word for what was happening in her chest. Her name was Adana. My daughter, before your father. She turned the photograph over again, studied the young woman's face, the shape of her jaw, the set of her mouth, and felt something close to vertigo. Because the resemblance wasn't close. It was exact. This woman could have been her own reflection pulled backward through 40 years. She dug deeper into the box, her hands no longer steady, and found a folded birth certificate, brittle at the creases, issued in Fulton County 36 years earlier. The name on it was Adana Grace Whitfield, mother listed as Ruth Whitfield, Shakira's grandmother, maiden name intact, no father listed at all. Beneath that, a stack of letters tied with string that had gone stiff with age, addressed to Ruth in handwriting that wasn't her grandmother's, dated across a span of nearly 2 decades, the earliest one postmarked only 4 years after that birth certificate. She opened the first one with hands that felt like they belonged to someone else. Ruth, it began, I know you told me not to write again, but I need you to know she's safe, she's healthy, and she asks about you sometimes even though she doesn't understand why. I'll keep my promise. I won't tell her the truth until you say it's time, but I need you to know that keeping this secret is costing me more than you understand, and I don't know how much longer I can carry it alone. The letter was signed with a single initial, a looping, old-fashioned capital G, and nothing else. Shakira sat on the floor of her apartment for a long time, the box open in front of her, the city lights of Buckhead throwing pale gold rectangles across the carpet, and she felt the specific, disorienting grief of learning that the story of your own life had a chapter you'd never been shown the cover of. She had grown up believing she was Reginald and Carol Anderson's only daughter, the baby who came 4 years after Terrence, the surprise her mother used to joke about at holidays. She had never once questioned it, because why would she? But sitting there, at 3 a.m, with a dead woman's name in her hands, a woman who looked exactly like her, born to her own grandmother, she understood with sudden, sick clarity that questioning it was exactly what she should have done a long time ago. She didn't sleep that night. At 6 a.m, she called the only person in the family who might tell her the truth without flinching, her Aunt Denise, her mother's younger sister, the one relative who had never fully forgiven Reginald for the way he'd treated Shakira over the years, the one who still sent birthday cards even when Reginald made it clear he'd prefer she didn't. Denise picked up on the second ring, her voice thick with sleep and immediate alarm. Shakira, it's 6 a.m. What's wrong? Who is Adana? Shakira said. No preamble, because she didn't have the strength for one. The silence on the other end of the line lasted long enough that Shakira thought the call had dropped. Where did you hear that name? Denise finally said. and her voice had changed entirely, gone quiet and careful, in a way Shakira had never heard from her before. Grandma left me a box. I found a photograph, a birth certificate, letters. Shakira's voice cracked on the last word, and she let it, because she was too tired to keep performing composure for a family that had never once returned the favor. Aunt Denise, please, I need someone in this family to tell me the truth for once in my life. There was a long breath on the other end, and then Denise said, very quietly, you need to come to my house. This isn't something I'm telling you over the phone, and it's definitely not something I'm telling you without your mother in the room, because Carol has been carrying this longer than you've been alive, and she deserves to be the one who decides how much you hear. Tell me one thing, Shakira said. Just one thing. Right now, so I'm not walking into that house blind. Is Adana my sister? Denise's answer came so quietly Shakira almost missed it. She was going to be, Denise said. But it's more complicated than that, sweetheart. And it's not my story to finish. Come at 10. I'll call your mother. Shakira arrived at Denise's house in Decatur at 9:55, and her mother's car was already in the driveway, which told her everything about how urgent this conversation actually was. Because Carol Anderson did not rearrange her schedule for anyone, not even her own daughter. Not in 4 years of watching Reginald slowly erase Shakira from every family conversation without once telling him to stop. Carol was sitting at Denise's kitchen table when Shakira walked in, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she clearly wasn't drinking, and the moment their eyes met, Shakira understood that whatever was about to be said had been sitting in her mother's chest for a very long time, heavy enough to bend a woman who had never once, in Shakira's entire life, looked this afraid. Sit down, baby, Carol said. I should have told you this 15 years ago. I'm sorry it took your father humiliating you in front of 200 people for me to finally find the courage. Shakira sat. Who is Adana? Carol closed her eyes for a moment, like she was gathering the strength to open a door she'd kept locked for decades. Adana was your father's first daughter, she said. Before me, before Terrence, before you. Your grandmother Ruth wasn't just your father's mother-in-law, sweetheart. She was raising Adana in secret, because your father's first wife died when the baby was only 2 years old, and Reginald, God forgive him, he couldn't look at that child without falling apart. He asked Ruth to take her, to raise her as her own, and he told everyone the marriage had ended, not that his wife had passed, because he couldn't bear the sympathy, couldn't bear people asking about the daughter he'd essentially given away. She took a shaking breath. I met him 2 years after that. I didn't know about Adana until we were already engaged. And by then, Ruth had raised her for 4 years, and your father made it very clear that if I wanted to marry him, that part of his life stayed buried. Shakira felt the room narrow around her. Where is she now? Where is Adana now? Carol's face crumpled. Just slightly, just enough. That's the part I don't have easy words for, she said. Because 6 months ago, your father found out where she'd been living all this time. And Shakira, baby, I need you to understand something before I tell you the rest. The reason your father has been unraveling for the last half a year, the reason he humiliated you in front of the whole family last night instead of just talking to you like a human being, it isn't about the business, and it was never really about you leaving the company. Then what is it about? Shakira said, though some deep, cold part of her had already started to guess. Carol reached across the table and took her daughter's hand, and her next words came out barely above a whisper. Adana didn't just resurface, sweetheart. She's been in contact with your father's biggest rival for months. She's the reason Hyun Woo Cho knew your name before he ever set foot in that reunion hall. For a long moment, Shakira couldn't make her mouth work at all. The kitchen in Decatur, with its yellow curtains and the smell of Denise's coffee going cold on the table, seemed to tilt sideways and then right itself, the way a room does when the ground underneath everything you believed about your life quietly gives way. Say that again? She finally managed. Say it slower, because I don't think I heard you right. Carol didn't let go of her hand. Adana reached out to Mr. Cho's company 8 months ago, she said. Not to hurt anyone, sweetheart. From what I understand, not at first. She'd built a name for herself in supply chain consulting, out of Charlotte, and somewhere along the way her work crossed paths with his. She didn't even know you existed until 3 months ago. Your father found out she was working with him, and it broke something loose in him that had been holding steady for 30 years. So he panicked, Shakira said, the pieces sliding into place with a coldness that frightened her a little, the same clear, analytical part of her mind that used to catch discrepancies in her father's books, now cataloging the discrepancies in his lies. He tried to buy Mr. Cho's silence with the company, and when that didn't work, he decided to destroy me publicly before either of you could destroy him first. I don't think he sees it that way, Carol said quietly. I think in whatever twisted logic he's built for himself, he believes protecting you meant making sure you never learned any of this. I think he's terrified that if you and Adana ever find each other, you'll both hate him equally, and some broken part of him decided it was easier to lose you first, on his own terms, than to lose you both later, on someone else's. Shakira pulled her hand back, not unkindly, but because she needed the space to think, needed to stand and pace the small kitchen the way she paced her office when a client's numbers weren't adding up, and she knew the truth was hiding somewhere she hadn't looked yet. Does she know about me? She asked. Right now, does Adana know I exist? Carol exchanged a glance with Denise, the kind of glance sisters share when neither one wants to be the one who says the hard thing. It was Denise who finally spoke. She's known for 3 weeks, Denise said. Your father found out she and Mr. Cho's team had started digging into Anderson Structural Group's finances, trying to understand what kind of man Reginald really was, before deciding whether to work with him at all. That digging is what led them both to you. Adana found out she had a half-sister running her own consulting firm 2 states over, and from what I understand, she's wanted to reach out for weeks. She just didn't know how to do it without blowing your entire family apart. It's already blown apart, Shakira said, and there was no anger in her voice now, only a kind of exhausted clarity. My father did that himself last night, in front of 200 people, before either of us ever had the chance to decide how this was going to go. If you're still with us, and something in this story has hit closer to home than you expected, drop a comment and tell us how you'd feel finding out a sister you never knew about had been part of the reason your whole family came undone. Hit that like button if this story is affecting you the way it's meant to. We're just getting started. Shakira sat back down at the table, her hands finally steady again. The analytical calm she relied on in every boardroom settling back over her like a familiar coat. I need her number, she said. Not through my father, not through anyone else. I need to talk to her myself, today, before this turns into another story. Other people tell about me instead of one I get to tell for myself. Carol reached into her purse and pulled out a folded slip of paper, and the fact that she already had it ready told Shakira her mother had been preparing for this moment far longer than this morning. She's staying at a hotel downtown, Carol said. She flew in yesterday. I think, sweetheart, some part of her was hoping to be at that reunion last night. I think she wanted to see you before either of you had to decide anything. I don't know if she chickened out or if something stopped her, but she was close enough to walk through those doors and she didn't. Shakira took the paper and stared at the number written in her mother's careful hand, and for a moment, she let herself feel the full, dizzying weight of it. A sister she'd never known, raised 4 states away by a version of her own grandmother she'd never gotten to meet, connected to her now by a man in a charcoal suit who'd walked into a family reunion and refused to let her father's cruelty be the last word of the night. She called the number from Denise's driveway 20 minutes later, sitting in her car with the engine off, her heart hammering so loudly she could hear it over the ringing. A woman answered on the 3rd ring, her voice cautious, careful, like someone who had spent a long time expecting bad news to come from unfamiliar numbers. Hello? Adana? Shakira said, and her own voice broke slightly on the name, the first time she'd ever said it out loud to the person it actually belonged to. My name is Shakira. I think you already know who I am. There was a long silence on the line, long enough that Shakira thought the call might have dropped, and then she heard the unmistakable sound of someone trying very hard not to cry. I've been carrying your name in my phone for 3 weeks, Adana finally said. I typed it out to call you 11 times, and I couldn't make myself press send, because I didn't know if you'd hate me for existing, or hate our father more for hiding me, or hang up before I could say anything at all. A shaky breath. I was outside the reunion hall last night. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 45 minutes trying to decide if I had the right to walk in there and change your whole life without asking you first. Shakira closed her eyes, her throat tight. You were there. I saw you leave, Adana said. I saw the way you were standing when you walked out, and I saw Mr. Cho follow you. And I almost got out of the car right then, and I still didn't, because I kept thinking, what if she already has enough people breaking her heart tonight, and I don't need to be one more? A pause, thick with everything neither of them had said yet. Can we meet? Today, I don't want to do this over the phone anymore. I've spent my whole life being someone's secret, and I don't want to be yours too. Yes, Shakira said, before she'd even finished deciding, because some part of her had already decided the moment she read the words on the back of that photograph. Today, now, if you want. There's a coffee shop near my hotel, Adana said. Midtown. I'll text you the address. A pause, and then, quieter, more fragile than anything she'd said so far. Shakira, I need you to know, whatever happens after this, whatever our father did or didn't do, I never wanted to be the reason your family blew up in front of 200 people. Shakira looked out the windshield at the quiet Decatur street, at a morning that had started with a photograph and was ending, somehow, with the sound of a sister's voice for the first time in 33 years. You're not the reason, she said. He's the reason. You're just the truth he spent 3 decades running from. And I think it's time both of us stopped paying for that. She hung up, started the car, and pulled out of Denise's driveway with the address to a midtown coffee shop glowing on her phone screen, unaware that at that exact moment, 12 miles away, Reginald Anderson was sitting in his office with the door locked, staring at a single text message from a number he hadn't seen in 30 years. A message that read only, "We need to talk before she finds out everything." The coffee shop in Midtown was nearly empty when Shakira walked in, the lunch rush not yet started, sunlight cutting through the front windows in long, pale bars across the wooden tables, and she saw Adana before Adana saw her, sitting alone near the back with both hands wrapped around a cup she wasn't drinking, exactly the way their mother had been sitting an hour earlier, the same nervous stillness passed down through blood neither of them had known they shared until last night. For a moment, Shakira simply stood in the doorway and looked at her. The resemblance wasn't subtle. It wasn't the vague, arguable kind of resemblance families joke about at holidays. It was the same jaw, the same set of the shoulders, the same habit, she would learn within the hour, of tapping 2 fingers against a table when thinking hard about something. Adana looked up, and their eyes met, and neither of them moved for a long second, both of them doing the same silent arithmetic, 33 years of separate lives suddenly needing to be reconciled in the space of a coffee shop booth. You look like her, Adana finally said, when Shakira sat down across from her. The photograph. I have the same one. Grandma standing next to me at my high school graduation. Except in mine, she's 20 years older than in yours. She kept photographs of you your whole life, Shakira said. She never told me. I found the box 3 years after she died, and even then I almost didn't open it, because she'd asked me to wait until I was ready, and some part of me knew whatever was in there was going to be too big to put back once I let it out. Adana's eyes filled, and she wiped at them quickly, embarrassed. I used to ask her about my father when I was little, she said. She'd get this look, careful, guarded, and she'd tell me he loved me but he wasn't able to raise me, and that someday, when I was old enough, she'd tell me the rest. She died before someday came. She wrapped her hands tighter around the cup. I didn't even know his name was Reginald Anderson until 8 months ago, when I started digging into a construction firm my business partner was thinking about acquiring, and something about the name kept nagging at me until I finally asked my grandmother's old neighbor, the one who'd known her back in the day, and she told me everything in about 10 minutes flat, like she'd been waiting 30 years for someone to finally ask. Shakira felt something twist in her chest, a strange, aching kinship with a stranger who had spent her whole life circling the edges of the same absence Shakira herself had never known was there. He let you think he didn't want you, she said quietly. That's what breaks something in me, more than anything else. He didn't just hide you. He let you grow up believing you weren't wanted, when the truth is, he was too much of a coward to face what losing your mother did to him. I've made my peace with that part, Adana said, though her voice suggested peace was still very much a work in progress. What I haven't made peace with is finding out he tried to buy Hyun-woo's silence, rather than ever telling either of us the truth himself. That's not grief anymore, Shakira. That's just cruelty with a business card. She hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a slim folder, sliding it across the table. There's something else. Part of why I hesitated so long to reach out to you. I didn't just find him through business. I found this. Shakira opened the folder and found a series of financial statements, account transfers, a trust document dated 18 years earlier, her grandmother's signature at the bottom, and a beneficiary line that made her stomach drop before she'd even finished reading it. The trust had been established in both their names, hers and Adana's, equally, funded by Ruth Whitfield's life savings, and a modest inheritance from her own mother, meant to be split evenly between her granddaughters on their 30th birthdays. I turned 33 years ago, Adana said quietly. I never received a cent. I assumed the trust had lapsed, or that Grandma had changed her mind before she passed, and I let it go, because I didn't want to be the person chasing money from a family that had never claimed me. She tapped the second page. Then I found this. A withdrawal, 6 years ago, the full amount, both our shares, signed out by a power of attorney document your father filed, the year after Grandma died, the same year, Shakira, that you left his company. Shakira stared at the number at the bottom of the page, and the room seemed to narrow around her for the second time in 2 days. He took it, she said. He took both our inheritances, and he never told either of us it existed. I think that's why he panicked when he found out I was real, Adana said. It was never just about the family secret coming out. It was about what happens when both of us start asking where the money went. 12 miles away, in the locked office of Anderson Structural Group, Reginald Anderson sat staring at his phone with his hands pressed flat against his desk to keep them from shaking, rereading the message that had arrived that morning from a number he hadn't seen in 3 decades. We need to talk before she finds out everything. Below it, a second message had just come through, and this one made the blood drain from his face entirely. I heard what you did at the reunion. I warned you 30 years ago that secrets like this don't stay buried forever, Reginald. I'm done protecting you. If you don't tell both your daughters the truth about that trust by the end of the week, I will. Reginald's hand hovered over the phone, and for a long moment he didn't move at all, staring at the signature at the bottom of the message, a single looping capital letter he hadn't seen in 30 years and had hoped, prayed, never to see again. The message was signed, simply, G. Shakira and Adana sat across from each other in the coffee shop for a long time after the folder went quiet between them. Neither one speaking, both of them staring at numbers that represented more than money, that represented every year their father had let them believe things about themselves and each other that weren't true. It was Shakira who finally broke the silence, and when she spoke, her voice had the flat, deliberate calm she used when a client's finances didn't add up, and she already knew, before she said a word, exactly where the discrepancy was hiding. We're not doing this quietly, she said. I spent 9 years quietly balancing his books while he took credit for my work. I'm not spending one more day being quiet about this. What do you want to do? Adana asked. I want to go to him, Shakira said. Today. Together. Not to yell, not to beg him to explain himself, because I don't think there's an explanation that makes any of this forgivable. I want to look him in the eye and tell him we know, all of it, the trust, the sale offer to Mr. Cho, everything, and I want to watch his face when he realizes he doesn't get to control this story anymore. Adana's hand found hers across the table, steady despite the tremor Shakira could feel underneath it. Then I'm coming with you. They called Hyun Woo Cho from the car, and he answered on the first ring, like he'd been half expecting the call since the moment he'd driven away from Shakira's building the night before. When Shakira explained where they were going and why, there was a brief pause on the line, and then his voice came back low, careful, and entirely without hesitation. I'll meet you there, he said, not to interfere. To make sure that whatever he tries to do to control the narrative this time, he doesn't have the room to do it. 2 witnesses are easier to intimidate than 3, and he's already shown me exactly how far he's willing to go with an audience. Reginald Anderson's office sat on the top floor of a modest building near the West Midtown rail yards. The same office Shakira had worked out of for 9 years. The same window she used to stare out of during the long nights she'd spent quietly saving a business that never once thanked her for it. She hadn't set foot in that building in 4 years, and walking through the front doors again, flanked by a sister she'd known for exactly 6 hours, and a man she'd known for exactly 1 day, felt like walking into a version of her own life that had been rearranged without her permission. Reginald's assistant tried to stop them at the front desk, alarmed, reaching for the phone, but Shakira walked past her without slowing, because there was nothing left in that building that had the authority to stop her anymore. She pushed open her father's office door and found him standing at the window, his back to the room, his phone still in his hand, and something in the set of his shoulders told her he already knew this moment was coming, before she'd even said a word. "We know about the trust," Shakira said. "We know you took both our inheritances and let us believe there was nothing to inherit. We know you offered to sell your company at a loss just to keep Mr. Cho from working with me. And we want to know who G is and why they just told you they're done, protecting whatever secret you've been hiding for 30 years. Reginald turned slowly, and for the first time in Shakira's entire life, she watched her father's face collapse, not into anger, but into something closer to grief, something raw and unguarded that she had never once been allowed to see. "You weren't supposed to find out this way," he said, his voice cracking on the last word. "There was no good way," Adana said, stepping forward, and it was the first time she'd spoken since walking into the room, her voice shaking but unbending. "You had 33 years to find a good way, and you spent every single one of them hiding instead." Reginald's phone buzzed in his hand, and he looked down at it with an expression that made every muscle in Shakira's body go tense, because whatever he was reading had drained the last of the color from his face entirely. "She's here," he said, almost to himself. "God help me, she's actually here." The office door opened behind them before anyone could ask who he meant, and a woman stepped inside, tall, elegant, silver-threaded through hair that had once, unmistakably, been the same shade as Adana's, and the moment she crossed the threshold, Adana made a sound that wasn't quite a word, half breath, half disbelief, and took a step backward, like the floor had shifted beneath her. "You told me she died," Adana whispered, staring at the woman like she was looking at a ghost that had learned to breathe. "My whole life, you told me my mother died when I was 2 years old." The woman's eyes filled instantly, and she looked at Adana with 30 years of longing compressed into a single, unbearable expression. "My name is Grace," she said quietly, "and I did not die, Adana. Your father paid me to disappear." If this story has you gripping your phone right now, go ahead and hit subscribe before you keep reading, because what happens in the next part is going to change how you see everyone in this room. Let's get into it. Reginald's voice broke as he turned to face her fully, decades of carefully maintained silence finally giving way all at once. "Grace, don't. Not like this. Not in front of both of them. I stayed quiet for 30 years because you begged me to, because you told me it would protect her, because you swore you'd tell her the truth when she was old enough to understand," Grace said, her voice trembling, but growing stronger with every word. "And instead, you let her believe I was dead? And you let this one," she nodded toward Shakira, tears sliding freely down her face now, "grow up never knowing she had a sister at all. And you stole money that belonged to both of them, and you stood in front of 200 people 2 nights ago, and disowned the only child in this family who ever did anything but enable you." She stepped further into the room, and something in her posture straightened, 30 years of buried grief hardening into resolve. "I'm not disappearing again, Reginald. And I brought something with me that I think both your daughters deserve to see before this goes any further." She reached into her bag and withdrew a sealed envelope, worn soft at the corners from decades of handling, and held it out, not to Reginald, but to Adana, whose hands were shaking too hard to take it at first. "This is the agreement your father made me sign the year you turned 2, Grace said. "It has his signature on it, and it has something else on it too. Something he spent 30 years hoping neither of you would ever see." Adana's hands trembled so badly that Shakira reached over and steadied them, and together they opened the envelope, unfolding 30-year-old paper that had gone soft and fragile with time, and read the agreement that had shaped both their lives without either of them ever knowing it existed. It wasn't only a payoff for Grace's silence. It was a loan agreement, dated the same month Adana turned 2, transferring nearly the entire sum of Grace's settlement, the money Reginald had paid her to disappear, directly into the founding capital of what would become Anderson Structural Group. Beneath that, a second clause, one that made Shakira's stomach drop, structured the company's original ownership, so that a percentage, quietly, invisibly, on paper no one had ever thought to ask about, belonged to Grace, and, upon her death or formal transfer, to her daughter. "He built his company on your mother's money," Shakira said slowly, looking up at Adana. "Not just paid her off. He used what he paid her to build the very thing he's spent his whole life being proud of. And then he used our grandmother's trust to cover his tracks when the company's books didn't balance the year Shakira left," Grace said quietly, watching Reginald's face crumble further with every word. "I've spent 3 decades staying quiet, because I believed you when you told me it would protect her. I don't believe that anymore, Reginald. I think it only ever protected you." Reginald sank into the chair behind his desk, the fight finally gone out of him entirely, and for a long moment no one in the room spoke. The only sound the distant hum of the building's air conditioning and the soft, unsteady breathing of a man watching every carefully constructed version of his life come apart in front of the only people who had any right to watch it happen. "I was 26 years old," he finally said, his voice hollow. "Adana's mother, my first wife, died, and I didn't know how to be a father and grieve at the same time. And Grace? She was my sister-in-law. She offered to help, and it turned into something I never meant it to turn into. And when Ruth found out, she made it very clear that the only way to protect the family, all of it, was for Grace to disappear and for Adana to be raised as her granddaughter, instead of mine and Grace's daughter." He put his head in his hands. "I told myself every year that next year I'd make it right. And every year it got harder to imagine surviving the truth." "You didn't survive it," Shakira said quietly. "You just made sure the rest of us paid for it instead." Hyun-woo, who had stood silently near the door through all of it, finally spoke, his voice measured, deliberate, carrying the same calm authority it had carried in the banquet hall 2 nights before. "Reginald, I'll say this plainly, because I think you need to hear it from someone who has no reason to soften it. You have a choice in front of you right now that you haven't had in 30 years. You can spend whatever time you have left fighting to protect a version of yourself that no longer exists. Or you can start, today, by giving both these women what has always belonged to them. And let that be the first honest thing you've done as their father in a very long time." It took the better part of 2 months to untangle everything legally. The trust, the company's original ownership structure, the decades of quiet fraud layered over each other like sediment. Avery Whitcomb, an attorney Grace had kept on retainer for 30 years without ever using her, finally earned her fee, working alongside Shakira's own financial expertise to unwind a mess that would have taken anyone else years to fully understand. In the end, Reginald signed over controlling interest in Anderson Structural Group to a restructured ownership split between Adana, Grace, and Shakira, retaining a minority stake and an advisory role he no longer had the standing to abuse. Terrence, who had spent 30 years being groomed as the heir to a company built on a lie he'd never been told, chose, quietly and without drama, to step back from the business entirely and finish the engineering degree he'd abandoned at 22 to make their father proud. Shakira never did take Hyun-woo's original partnership offer, not exactly. Instead, 3 months after the reunion that changed everything, she and Adana launched a joint consultancy together, built on the 2 things they had both spent their lives mastering separately, Shakira's financial precision and Adana's operational strategy. And within its first year, the firm had already outpaced anything either of them had built alone. Hyun-woo became their first major client, and then, slowly, carefully, something more than that, though neither of them rushed to name it, both of them having learned, in their own separate ways, exactly what it cost to build something real on top of something rotten, and neither one willing to make that mistake twice. Grace moved to Atlanta that spring, close enough to finally be present for the birthdays and holidays she had missed for 30 years, and though the relationship between her and Adana remained careful, tender, still learning its own shape, it was, for the first time in either of their lives, honest. The Anderson family held its next reunion the following summer, smaller this time, quieter, without the performance and the pressure of a legacy built on secrets. Shakira stood at the entrance of a modest backyard gathering, watching her sister laugh with their mother near the dessert table, watching Grace and Ruth's old friends finally get to meet the granddaughter they'd wondered about for decades. And when Hyun-woo appeared beside her, holding 2 glasses of sweet tea instead of champagne, She took one and let herself, finally, exhale. "No microphone this time," he said, glancing around the yard. "No microphone this time," she agreed. "Just family, the real kind." She thought about the girl who had spent 9 years balancing her father's books and getting nothing but silence in return. About the woman who had stood frozen in a banquet hall while her father tried to erase her in front of 200 witnesses, and she understood. Standing in that quiet backyard with a sister she'd known for less than a year, and a man who had refused to let a cruel moment be the last word, that everything her father had tried to take from her that night had come back to her tenfold, not because she'd fought for revenge, but because she had finally, after 33 years, stopped waiting for someone else's permission to be believed. She raised her glass slightly toward Adana across the yard, and Adana raised hers back, and for the first time in either of their lives, the space between two sisters who had grown up as strangers felt like exactly what it was always supposed to be. Family, chosen this time, not by silence, but by truth. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the subscribe button and stay tuned for more.